Surprise! An ICE detention center is coming to the West Valley. City leaders say they learned of the development through the news, and there's nothing they can do to stop it. What we know about that facility, the community rallying against this detention site, and how it fits into the administration's larger immigration enforcement efforts. That's on this edition of the Arizona's Family Investigates podcast.
Taking you behind the investigation. This is the Arizona's Family Investigates podcast.
Thanks for joining us. I'm Amy Cutler, here with senior investigative producer Cody Lillick. We found out ICE bought this warehouse in Surprise back at the end of January. They paid $70 million cash.
And ever since that sale, it has raised a lot of questions in that community in Surprise and that immediate area. First, the city says it wasn't even informed and had no details about how that facility, which is essentially a warehouse, would be used. They had lots of questions, but they told us the Department of Homeland Security, the agency that oversees ICE, wasn't returning their calls. Then we looked up the records for the site through the assessor's office, and it had been valued at $46 million. And a reminder, they bought it for $70 million cash.
Yeah, it raised a lot of questions surrounding what the discrepancy here was. Why would ICE pay so much more than what the assessor's office said was the value of the site?
And just looking back on sales, that is a common practice. The assessor's office will value something at a certain value, but when you're selling a property, you want to get the best value you can get for that. So the developers, we don't know how much they were asking for it. That we were able to get an archived web page of the listing, but of course it was one that said contact for details. There was no asking price still on that archived web page that we were able to see from the people who were selling this property. But we do know, that typically the assessor's office sets the assessed value, but typically, depending on market conditions, they can end up selling for higher or sometimes lower, but most of the time it's higher and benefits the seller in that case.
We should mention, though, I spoke with a couple of attorneys who said they were not surprised that ICE would do this and pay cash because they wanted to make sure the sale went through quickly. We should mention we've seen lots of opposition to these ICE detention centers in other communities. And so it sort of seems like possibly another tactic that they're using, not informing communities and just buying up the space. Yeah,
and that's what kind of sets ours apart. We looked at other facilities being bought in other metropolitan areas in Oklahoma City, Kansas City, really across the country, as a part of this program, and we found that the ones that were being disrupted had a good amount of warning. So there were already coordinated protests, coordinated movements that were able to get out in front of this because they were able to learn about it beforehand. You compare that to what happened in Surprise, and this sale went through, and that's what triggered everybody learning about it, was this sale for $70 million cash. The sale was already done. You look at other places, Oklahoma City, they were able to successfully fight against that facility because ICE bought the property, but they were able to convince the existing owner not to go through with the sale. But again, compare it to Surprise, the sale already went through. So there's very little, if anything, they can do to get that back. And worth noting, watchdog groups have been tracking the sale of these sites and found that for sales on facilities in Texas, Utah, Missouri, Tennessee, and also Virginia have all been canceled. But it was when it was still in the purchase process that communities were aware of this beforehand and were able to voice their frustration ahead of time before the sale was actually executed. But here in Surprise, the sale went through, and that's how people here learned of this new neighbor in their backyard. And it's really an issue that has divided the community. Neighbors have taken to the city council and spoken during public comment at the last two city council meetings.
Law enforcement agents are removing criminals from our neighborhoods. It is much safer for me, my family, and my neighbors if those criminals are detained securely as they await deportation. And that is why I support ICE having a facility to do so.
The Department of Homeland Security posted on social media, and I quote, "You will not stop us. This administration will not be intimidated. So why are we so intimidated?" We are here in person standing up for our community, and that will not end. We will show up to every meeting, even if it is just 20 of us. We will protest, we will call, and we will not go silently into the night.
The first rule when you come to this country is come legally. You have already violated the law when you come across the border. You don't have to commit another crime. You're already a criminal.
It's incumbent upon this council to use everything, every available resource to protect the character and safety of Surprise. And I urge you to take a stand for the community.
These were really passionate people who spoke out, strong feelings both for and against. We should mention that this went on for several hours at both of these city council meetings, city leaders urging the neighbors who spoke out to have respect for both sides. And that is what we saw. There was obviously strong feelings, but stayed peaceful.
And I will note, even though, we gave a pretty even representation of both sides, it was very one-sided in the council meeting itself. And looking at the entirety of it, you had very few people showing up in support of this site. And really, their support was not necessarily about the site, but what was about the purpose of the site. So the enhanced immigration enforcement, the criminality involved, and the overall position of the administration. There was, and you heard it there in those sound bites, there was very little mention about the site itself. It was more about illegal immigration, the policy issues surrounding it, and what the administration is talking about as far as, getting the worst of the worst and that initiative. But it was very much, I would say, between probably 80% at least were speaking out against this site in particular. And a lot of them were saying they weren't making a point about the policy itself. It was really an issue of the location. This is, in an industrial lot, but it is pretty close to some neighborhoods and some schools. And just looking at the politics aspect of it as well, because we were curious. We were like, okay, so let's see how that area, assuming these people are speaking for or against immigration, illegal immigration, one way or the other, let's see how they voted. So in 2020, we looked at the precincts, the precinct where that site is located, and all of the precincts that touch that site. In 2020, 53.5% voted for Donald Trump. And in 2024, 56.9% voted for Donald Trump in just those precincts there in the immediate Surprise and bordering on El Mirage. So it is a little surprising to see this, but it is much more of a location battle and neighbors not wanting this in their area rather than a policy issue.
Yeah, and it was interesting. We had the chance to go to a shopping area and go into some of those neighborhoods. And you're exactly right. There's concerns about property values. We should also mention there's a daycare, a high school, shopping, communities nearby. And there's a lot of uncertainty if you're putting the worst of the worst in a set location, what this means for the surrounding community.
And I know we'll talk about, what can be done a little bit later, but in researching this, looking at the other areas that have had these facilities proposed, one proposal was halted, and a member of Congress, a local representative, basically said, okay, don't take this site here in the city. We have this site out, and I believe it was with the local sheriff's office, had a vacant plot of land out in a rural area. So, it's like looking at, okay, well, maybe not this site, but what about other sites? So we'll talk a little bit about what can be done about these sites a little bit later. But I want to talk more about the copies of some DHS documents that you were able to get Amy. They talked about how they plan to use this specific facility in Surprise. They said it would be a regional processing center with an average daily population between 1,000 and 1,500 detainees, that they would be in that facility anywhere between 3 and 7 days. So this would be a kind of a constant stream of people moving in and out, moving in from being detained to then moving on to be taken either to another detention facility or possibly to be deported altogether. It would basically serve as a staging location for those transfers and removals.
And we should point out that we have been waiting several weeks to get any information on this site. We've been pressing city leaders, state leaders, representatives at the federal level. We've been reaching out to DHS, and they have not provided us with any information. So these documents were really helpful to see, to put this in perspective. And ICE says that their model includes the acquisition and renovation of 8 large-scale detention centers and 16 processing sites. That is nationwide. In all, they say this will cost $38 billion. It's funded through the One Big Beautiful Bill. The focus here, they write, is on, quote, increasing total bed capacity, enhancing custody management, and streamlining removal operations.
And it also noted by the end of fiscal year 2026, DHS says they should have more than 92,000 beds. They want all facilities that are a part of this project online by the end of November of 2026. In Surprise, the documents emphasize it's an economic benefit to the city of Surprise and the region, explaining DHS will spend $150 million to retrofit. A reminder, this is a warehouse building, so it's not meant to house people. It's meant to store goods and get goods in and out. It was meant for a distribution facility. So trying to retrofit that building, they say, will cost $150 million just to do that on the existing structure. And they say it will cost another $180 million over the next 3 years once it's operational to run that facility.
It's just a staggering amount of money. And the frame here, they had this economic benefit that they really were highlighting. They say that it will create nearly 1,400 construction jobs. That's just during the retrofitting period, and another 500 jobs each year of operation. DHS also wrote that their engineering team has looked at the electricity, the water usage, and waste removal and have determined that the building will have the capacity to meet their needs.
And that was an interesting thing that was also brought up in the city council is, does this have the infrastructure it needs? Because this building, again, was not built to house 1,500 people plus the employees that would work there. It was only built and the infrastructure exists for the distribution center that it was intended to be used for. So that was a question that one member of the public comment had was, are the water and sewer systems going to hold up? Do they have enough power going to that place? And also the public safety issue is something that they have been wanting answers on. But as we saw in the DHS documents, and really it's the only notice that DHS has provided in response, is this document from DHS saying that it was going to be an economic benefit, and all of the other information we had essentially already learned on our own. So the mayor and city council received the documents just last week, and they say it doesn't address all of their concerns.
I think it's kind of broad stroke of what the impacts are going to be. That's why we want to just initiate communication with DHS and make sure that the city has enough time to plan and prepare for any contingency.
Now, city leaders sent DHS a letter last week requesting more information. Chief among them, how response will work for firefighters and police officers. Will they get a chance to tour the facility before it opens so they have an understanding of the layout in an emergency? City leaders have consulted attorneys and say DHS just doesn't have to adhere to the local zoning laws.
Given the federal Supremacy Clause, there's not much that the city can do, and I think for us it's just about initiating communication, trying to reach out and making sure that we have that dialogue with DHS and being prepared as we can be for the facility coming.
So the city says they are preparing for it coming. There's not much that they can do, but the public is basically shouting from the rooftops saying there's got to be something you can do. If the city were to try and fight this like other cities have attempted to do, it would likely set up a big legal battle. The mayor mentioned the Supremacy Clause, which of course states that federal law takes precedence over state and local laws. But some in the community are reminding the council about the 10th Amendment, which also limits federal power and ensures state and local municipalities have control over local matters. So whatever the argument would be, and if there is anything attempted, it would likely set up for a lengthy court battle, which can cost the city of Surprise and any others a good chunk of change if they decide to challenge this legally. So it would be interesting to see if they then try to pool with other cities that this is happening to, or what kind of avenues they would have.
And it's interesting because each municipality seems to be taking a different tack to this. We've seen some arguing sewage, water, trying to find some way around this. And attorneys that we've spoken with say, they fall on both sides. Some say there's a strong case to be made here. Others say it's pretty clear cut with the Supremacy Clause. We should also mention, DHS says it's done all of this testing on electricity, water, sewage, all of that. We don't really know what went into that testing. Typically when you buy a property, there's a due diligence period, there's an inspection time. So you would expect that somebody went in there and looked at all of that. But what it boils down to is detention centers are really jails. You're going to be holding people, and for a period of time, they're going to be staying on that property. And, there's a lot that comes with that.
And 1,500 people in a small space. Usually it would be in a neighborhood type setting in that area, but 1,500 people in that small space. Granted, it is a warehouse. It's not something that area was built for or intended for. Cities develop their master plans and zoning laws for really just this issue, so that the things that they don't want to move in don't move in. But when it's the federal government, they have very little argument, and the city of Surprise is now left scrambling and honestly taken by surprise about what options they have in this site that's coming in.
Yeah, and city leaders sort of said that they don't think that there's anything in this warehouse. It's just 4 walls. So whether they build a second story to it, or how they, it's a pretty high facility. So you could put levels in there, but how they lay this out, how it's maintained, we just don't know yet. We should also mention that Congressman Paul Gosar also sent a letter to DHS asking for more information. He was very clear in his support for the administration and mass deportations, but said Surprise deserved more information.
So we talked a little bit about this before, but let's talk about the next steps. The documents that we've obtained from the Department of Homeland Security show a plan for 3 years. That would put us at the end of President Trump's second term. That's through the end of the term. So what do these documents lay out? Anything that would happen after that time?
Not at all. Not at all. And that's a point of contention here, because there are some who are studying this who say, what happens to these massive properties once you've got, you're scaling up right now, but what happens when theoretically you've deported who you need to deport? What happens to these facilities after that? Could they become standing jails? Potentially, but there's just a lot of uncertainty.
Well, and then you would have essentially, if they did become jails, would it be a public entity, a private entity? And then you would have, if it is a private entity, you would have zoning laws that would come into effect then. So, once it's already changed by the federal government, there's not much you can do after that, since there are no zoning oversights for this project. So let's talk about city leaders. They say they will be in Washington, D.C. in March. They are asking for a meeting with DHS. What are they hoping to get out of this?
Well, so they point out that this was a pre-planned trip. They go once a year to meet with some different elected officials to sort of make their case for more funding for a variety of issues. And they're saying to DHS, hey, we're in town. We'd like to meet with you face to face. They are, they're pretty frustrated at this point. They have reached out by phone, email, text, any way that they can communicate with DHS, and they haven't heard back. And so they're, mentioning that they're there and hoping potentially to just get a few minutes of someone's time to get some answers on this.
And with, roughly 8 to 9 months, there's not much time between now and when they hope to have this facility operating. You'd expect some retrofitting to begin pretty quickly.
Yeah, and that's what actually we kind of drove around the perimeter of the property, because I was wondering if we were going to see some construction crews maybe putting out some equipment or doing something. The building's been untouched. They've got some really nice landscaping around it, but no fences or anything. So it doesn't look like anything has changed from the pictures that we found from when the property was up for sale.
Well, and even though this is considered an ICE processing facility, you would expect, since it is the processing center is essentially detention, short term, before they can be moved on to either their deportation location or another facility. They're there in detention, so you would expect to have some kind of security going up, fence, something resembling a secure facility, because right now the neighbors in the area just see that building sitting the same as it has, and eventually they would want to see, if this is coming to town, safeguards to make sure that their neighborhood is safe, because it is essentially a jail or a detention facility. And if, as the administration claims, they are getting the worst of the worst, and putting them in detention facilities or getting processed in these facilities, how is it going to be secure in their area? And that's another concern that the city of Surprise has, is the police and fire response, because essentially you're increasing the population of the city. They are not official residents, but they are residing in that processing facility for 3 to 7 days. And we've seen some reports of these processing facilities holding people in these facilities for longer than what they are supposed to. That is of those existing facilities that have already been in the network, not the ones that they are building online now.
Yeah, and I should mention one of the city council members I spoke with was actually doing some research about how frequently detainees are able to escape from some of these facilities, and it turns out it's not zero. So there's some concern there. There's a gymnastics school, cheerleading academy right around the corner. They are also in this industrial area because they like the high ceilings. It was a little bit cheaper for them, so they've spent a lot of money making that facility their own, and now they are right around the corner from what will be a very large processing center.
And it's really been a transparency issue above all. And we even had the Department of Homeland Security Secretary, Kristi Noem, here in the Valley for an event, and it was a completely unrelated event. She did go to the border before that, but most recently she was in the Valley for a voter identification event where she was talking about some legislation surrounding voter identification. But when it comes to this site and concerns over sites like it, really the answer has always pointed to the previous administration and the swell of migrants that we saw across the border, and basically saying if that hadn't happened, this wouldn't have to happen. But now, you have neighbors saying this is happening now in my backyard, and, in a neighborhood where it has been a majority Republican, 56%, 57% nearly in the last election. So it has definitely gotten people talking on both sides of the aisle.
Yeah, and GOSAR, we should also mention, has put out this letter to DHS requesting more information. They gave them 10 business days to respond. I believe that time is about up. And according to his office, they've had some productive phone conversations, but they also have said they want a response in writing to each of those questions because they believe this is an important enough issue that their questions should be addressed. And so we're still talking to them, hoping as soon as they get any additional information, they'll share it with us because we know that there's a lot of interest in this.
And that was an interesting thing at that event with Secretary Noem. Representative Gosar was at that event. So, and the only documents that we know that everybody has received are these documents from Homeland Security that we've looked at that focus on the economic benefit. It doesn't really touch on the infrastructure, the security, the emergency personnel that would be needed if this does, if and when it does move into town.
Yeah, and Surprise is also questioning who's going to pay for this, right? Like, because it's a large facility, so if police and fire and all of that costs money, right? So the city also has concerns about their bottom line.
So definitely a lot to track with this and to see if it does eventually come to fruition and coming online in November. We will continue to monitor this and continue to follow the reaction on both sides of this very controversial issue taking place in Surprise. Thanks for joining us for this edition of the Arizona's Family Investigates podcast. For Amy Cutler, I'm Cody Lillick. Thanks for joining us.
The Arizona's Family Investigates podcast, hosted by Amy Cutler and produced by Cody Lillick, and a production of Arizona's Family 3 TV, CBS 5, and azfamily.com in Phoenix, Arizona.